go. I am recording now.
Okay, thank you. I'm Don Moss, the Dean of the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences at Saybrook University. It is my pleasure to announce this webinar and welcome each of you to the webinar on mindful leadership and evidence-based framework with our panelists, Dr. Dorianne Cotter-Lockhart, Dr. Luann Fortune, and Kristen Jameson, almost doctor. I'm going to begin, as is our custom, with a moment of meditation and invite each of you to get comfortable where you are, placing yourself in a comfortable position. And we're going to begin with a moment of mindfulness. So what do we do in mindfulness? The elements are very simple. We bring our attention to the present moment. We release any emotional baggage, the stress of the day, distractions. We turn our awareness to our own experience. We observe and experience whatever is happening in this moment, and I'm going to invite you this evening to use as your focus the process of your own breathing. Taking long, slow, even, gentle breaths without effort. Effortless, relaxed breathing. And be aware of mindfully immersing yourselves into an awareness of your breathing. Surround the process, the inhale, the air streaming into your body, a momentary pause as the breath transports through your body into the lungs. And then an exhale with awareness and a sense of release. Releasing, relaxing. We set aside any judgments when we're mindful. We set aside any judgments about our breathing, about distractions, about our awareness, about ourselves, about others. We accept ourselves mindfully with compassion. We detach from the expectations and negative scripts that so often guide our actions. As we continue to be aware of our own experiencing and of our own breathing, taking long, slow, relaxed, gentle breaths, be mindful of the transformation within yourself. Be open to however you're transformed. Whether your body is relaxing, whether your thoughts are quieting, and accept whatever presents itself in your awareness. And if you feel that you're distracted and losing that attentiveness, accept that as well. Noticing it, accepting it, registering it, and returning to the present moment. Enjoying this single moment of respite from the day. Cherishing, hit the save button and remember this mindfulness for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, for the rest of the month. And now stretch, and let's turn our attention to our panel. And I'm going to welcome our leader for tonight's webinar, Dr. Luann Fortune, who will introduce herself, her credentials, her background, and will also introduce our panelists. Go ahead, Luann.
Thank you, Don. I know many of you on the call tonight, and I am grateful that you could join us. The work that we're going to be presenting tonight is the result of several months and a lot of attention, but it's also a culmination of for me, what has been a lifelong journey up to this point. So some of you know that before I came to holistic wellness, before I came to academia, that I was in the corporate world. So I was once a management consultant. I once was surrounded with institutional for-profit living. And I migrated from there into a total turnaround in my life when I became a massage therapist when, and then I eventually went back to school, got my doctorate midlife in human development, and ended up here at Saybrook University, where I've been working with Don for going on 6 years now. So I am in a very blessed position, but I think my life is just an evolution of the ability to pay attention and to honor coincidences that have come up. So one of the coincidences that I will introduce right now is Dorianne Cotter-Lockard. And Dorianne and I have known each other for a while now because we started our doctoral journey together at Fielding University. And Dorianne and I have some very parallel background points in our background, but also some ways that we complement each other. So Dorianne's got a PhD in human and organization systems from Fielding, which is where she and I went to graduate school. She's also got an MBA from New York University, the Stern School of Business, and her BA is from the Eastman School of Music. And even though I love music and I love to dance to it and sing to it, I cannot play an instrument to save my soul. So Dorianne brings a beautiful violin to our work together. She is teaching for us now at Saybrook University, bringing her background in leadership, management, and consulting to play in the work that I'm going to be telling you about tonight. And she's also a fellow at the Institute for Social Innovation at Fielding Graduate University, where we graduated and first met. So she conducts research in areas of team collaboration, leadership, coaching, and chamber music as a exhibit of collaborative teamwork and leadership, and spirituality in the workplace. She does have her own private consulting business, and she brings it out into practice as well. And she's presented extensively at different academic conferences, Academy of Management, APA, so the American Psychological Association, APA as we all know, Society for Phenomenology and Human Sciences, and the World Congress on Creativity and Spirituality in Management. And she's the editor of a new book that has just gone to press, I believe. It's to be published by Palgrave Macmillan, and it's on authentic leadership and followership in international perspective. And in it, she's also co-authored an article on compassionate communication, which was published in the Journal of Executive Education. She's been interviewed several times on Voice America Radio, and topics such as the inner work of the emergent leader and the foundation of soul-centered leadership. So she brings to us over 25 years of international leadership and coaching experience in large companies, Fortune 500 companies, where she helps leaders to develop inner awareness and to nurture their emotional, social, and spiritual intelligence so that they can lead with authenticity. And she's also served as a director on several nonprofit boards, and I'm just delighted to be working with her in this curriculum. Dorianne, did I miss anything? And I believe she's coming to us tonight from
Oh,
Gatwick Airport, is where you're sitting right now,
yes,
1:30 in the morning.
that's where I am.
I,
Yes. And
I
I'm delighted to be here.
So I also want to welcome and express my deepest gratitude to Kristen Jameson. Many of you know her as your colleague because she is a doctoral student at at Saybrook. But she's also been working with me as my research and teaching assistant over the past several months. And when Kristen first came to join me, I explained this project to her, and she jumped into it with both feet. And she probably has done more reading on this particular subject than Dorianne and I combined in it, at least in the last few months, and can offer the detail on all of the work that we did. Because what we're going to present to you tonight has to do with the literature of mindful leadership. And Kristen is not only qualified to do it by her work here as a doctoral student, but she has worked in corporate worlds doing leadership consulting, and they're large companies also, such as Intel and Nike. And she's also been meditating for 28 years. So she also brings her practice perspective to this. And I give you my great thanks and gratitude. So did I miss anything on that one? Great.
No, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We hope that we demonstrated together to each other the teamwork that can happen, and maybe we've had a few moments of actually having collective mindfulness, which is something we'll speak to today. And in one beautiful moment of coincidence, Kristen and I overnight must have dreamed the same dream, because in the morning we drew the same picture that we will show you tonight. And thinking about that just gives me chills. So just a little bit more about myself. Like I said, I've come to you from a wide range of backgrounds, but how did I come to this particular place? And I think it's like most good work comes to researchers and scholarships, it's with a hunch. So I would like to also thank Don Moss, because he had a hunch about something, and I think it proved right. I think mindful leadership is not just a passing fad or a flash in the pan, but it's something that can really give us sustainability going into the future as leaders, as collaborators, and hopefully welcome another new wave in healthcare and beyond. So the way we're going to work tonight is I've got a PowerPoint presentation. I am going to put it up so I won't be able to see the chat box. So Kristen, you're going to monitor the chat box, right?
Yes, I will do that.
And then you're going to jump in, and Dorianne's going to jump in. And I have been made the presenter, which is probably an excellent idea. And I'm going to now put my webinars, my cameras behind me, and I am going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation and maybe even put on my glasses. And I'm going to get started because I believe we are recording. So for those of you who are on the call, as you've got questions, I'd invite you to put them into the chat box, and Kristen will interrupt me because I won't be able to see it. But we're also going to be pausing throughout this for comments, for questions, and for discussion. So the way this will work is for about the next 30, 40 minutes, I'm going to work from a PowerPoint, pausing throughout for questions, and then we're hoping at the end we'll have more time for conversation, discussion, and talking about the next steps. So before I wind myself up and get started, are there any burning questions from anyone in our audience? Okay, including my dean. I don't hear him saying anything. So, Kristen and Dorianne, I'll rely on one of you to give me sort of a warning when we're at the hour. So when I'm 15 minutes into this, give me sort of a tap and say, move it along, Luann. Okay.
Okay.
So here we go.
All right.
All right. So how did this get started? Several months ago, Dr. Moss and I had a conversation, and he had this idea of looking more deeply into how we approached leadership in healthcare, because as many of you know, we have a specialization in our doctoral program at the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences, and The previous specialization was called healthcare systems, and some of you are still in that specialization. But what we thought was that as we go forward, maybe that there's something, a more relevant way we can approach this. So his task to me was to look at what mindful leadership would be, since we in our program, our department, and our scholarship are all about mindfulness. And we have been since the inception of our program 9 years ago. So the questions that we started with were, what is leadership? Or what is actually mindful leadership, and what is the mindful leader? But of course, it presupposes that we looked at what is leadership. Now, what do I mean by look at? Well, I got the wonderful advantage of having Kristen do this with me, because as you also know, we're an evidence-based program. So we are a research-based, scholarship-based program that relies on what does the evidence say about everything that we approach. So the way that we were going to approach this question was from the literature. The task that Kristen and I took on, and then Dorianne joined us, was to collect literature from the current material, as well as going back to what we thought was seminal research, having to do with answering these questions. And we delved into the literature. So our initial questions were, what about this movement toward mindful leadership? Is there any substance behind it? And our issue around that is that we are devoted to transforming healthcare, and we also believe that it requires unique leadership skills. So our task was to take the existing expanding information and to synthesize it, just like you would do when you all are doing a literature review. But we also know that we could integrate our personal awareness, our perspective, our practice basis into looking at this material. We also believe that in the process, we also needed to practice and model this in our own work. And we did that with relative success. Sometimes it went better than others. And something wonderfully important that Kristen reminded me of this morning is the important teaching, which is that when you can't live your life completely zen, when you can't go to the top of the mountain because you are busy sharpening your pencils and rebooting your computer, you can still do that mindfully. So I hope that's what we did in this. First of all, we listened for a sense of the whole. Why was this even relevant today? What is going on in the world outside of CIMHS and Saybrook University that would be calling up what we sensed was sort of a zeitgeist around mindful leadership? And a couple things struck us. First of all, the pace of living globally has just accelerated to a level of franticness that doesn't seem to be just confined to particular worlds. And in the last year, I've had the benefit of traveling globally to present my work and to share with other scholars and in communities, hearing all over in far-ranging places that everywhere the pace is accelerating and everywhere people are challenged by the issues of modernity and how to make progress and solve these huge challenges that face us today. We also got a sense that the movement behind mindful leadership made some assumptions. One was that on an individual basis, each of us can influence the acceleration of progress in how we adapt. And we know from our own work that mindfulness is a key tool that we can use throughout our practices, throughout with work with our clients, as well as in our day-to-day work. And how does that convey? Well, it has to do with applying awareness to expand consciousness, simply by pausing and reflecting as we did when we started our program today. And for those of you who are familiar with our programs, you know that that's the way we start classes, and that's the way we start meetings. And yeah, sometimes we might lose some of that going through it, but it's still a value for us to go back to, and it's a practice that we can hang on to. So what we thought was that this is going on everywhere. And through that, actions can become more intentional, and the interactions we have in this way of being intentional and mindful can ripple mindfulness via the butterfly effect, which probably everybody on this call knows about. The idea that that little butterfly can flap its wings somewhere and cause a tsunami somewhere. Well, we hope that that tsunami translates into a transformation into healthcare, and that healthcare professionals that are working with us are part of it, but that healthcare has special needs. So what is the bigger global part of it, even beyond healthcare? And we went to a lot of different sources in the literature, and in all of the places that we went to, we found the same issues coming up time and time again. The bodies of literature we looked at ranged from social psychology to political psychology to technology to IT principles. And there are four things that came up time and time again. Why is this craziness going on? Number one, we are depleting the natural resources of the earth at a rate that is accelerating, and there is no going back from that. And you would really have to not be living under in a cocoon not to know that today. So that continues to go on, and that there's no reversing it. So point number one. The point number two is that there are more people, and we are populating the earth to take up those natural resources and eat them up at a rate that we've never done before. And out of that comes special social and economic shifts, and they're associated with this globalization effort. Well, more people pushing into more places with more advanced technical weaponry to cause disruptions to each other can create boundary wars, ending up in political disruptions, which force migrations where people move into different places and they bring with them their language and their smells and their food, and they cause cultural shifts that are causing more and more tension throughout the world. Now, couple those two things with a third thing, which is that our IT, our technological advances, have exploded exponentially. And in his recent book, Thomas Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize winner, who writes about technology, says that the turning point was in 2007. And in 2007, several things happened that we probably all noticed but didn't understand the global implications. First of all, Apple introduced the iPhone, and we all started carrying around computers in our back pocket. Number two, Skype went global, meaning that at any point in time we could talk to and see other people around the world, from the Amazon basin right on through the polar cap. And the third thing that happened was that Facebook went public, and algorithms eventually came to rule the way we communicate and channel discussions and attention with each other. So put all these things together, and there's a critical time in human evolution. And today, progress is accelerating a rate beyond our human capacity to adapt. So what can the average person do about it? Well, this is my hunch as to why mindfulness has become so important. We can't change the tide of those global factors, but what we can do is we can control our own channeling of attention. And we can step back, and rather than become part of the fray where we're constantly reacting to things that are coming at us constantly, is we can pause and hit the reset button, which is what mindfulness is about. I also value that if all my colleagues around me hit the mindfulness button for just even 60 seconds a day, that's 60 seconds that they're not online bombarding me with other things, so that the ripple effect on this becomes huge. It is so huge that now it is being researched. In addition to being implemented in practice, as the systems thinkers in the group will come to appreciate, where there is public interest, there will be research interest. And where there's research interest, information proliferates, becomes more public interest. And we have a modern value about evidence-based practices in a variety of different ways. So what does the early research show? And this is where the work that Kristen and I did come into this. First of all, what we found is that overall, that mindfulness was linked to improved clinical outcomes. And that was not necessarily in leadership, but everywhere. It's being used with patients, being used in hospitals, being used in clinics. it can also enhance instructional effectiveness in the classroom. And many of you know this. You've written papers on it, or you maybe even done your dissertation on the impact mindfulness can have on learning. And there's this increasing interest of what happens in organizations. So there's some indication that mindfulness in different ways increases organization performance, tied to relationships, productivity, and even strategic initiatives. Well, those are all global statements. We're very curious about what that meant on a micro level. So we took a closer look at organizations and all the literature, and we found that there were lots of articles on mindfulness-based leadership development programs, training that might have been offered in workplace, and even an emerging set of principles and theories. On the practice side, we saw that there were also federal guidelines and clinical best practices to help shape mindfulness around workplace wellness programs, for example, and educational offerings, but they needed to be evidence-based. So we saw that the literature on this was growing and expanding rapidly. But what is mindfulness? So we all know the Kabat-Zinn point about mindfulness is awareness that one achieves through paying attention on purpose, non-judgmentally to one present moment. And I thought, oh, that's so important. That's that space I love to think about, that space between stimulus and response, that space. And it's with that space our power to choose and to grow. And I know that quote so well, I said to myself, because it's on my tagline on my personal email. And I heard about that years ago, and it's Viktor Frankl. So I went back to Frankl's book because, of course, I am one who's going to cite properly, and I've got to have the page number for everybody. And what I discovered is in Frankl's book, he never says that. So between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom, remains a powerful statement. But as a researcher, I learned that I had been drawing it from a source that I had an assumption about that wasn't correct. So what are the assumptions? Well, so these are the assumptions we bracketed, the word I like from my phenomenology training. Kristen and I stepped back and said, okay, at this point in our journey of looking at the literature, what do we believe about this? What are we assuming? Well, first of all, we agree this is a time of significant transformation. We need qualified professionals. We need them so much out there to lead the new medicine. And we really inherently believe in the approach we're taking. So maybe how much of this are we projecting on what the literature is actually saying here? We also believe that humanistically oriented professionals can lead that shift that can be focused on well-being and still be productive and be generative and be innovative, and that we can cultivate those professionals and change the future. So we know that's what we assume. Now let's test it. We also adhere to this, that every one of us already has the capacity to be mindful, and the practice is to cultivate it. What did the literature say? The very first thing we had to admit that most of what we were reading, and the literature was prolific, was geared toward the individual's mindfulness practice. That even the literature that claimed to be based on organization was about the individual practice of mindfulness. And we were at the early stages of mindful leadership theory development with emerging principles about what qualities, what behavior, what intersections, that many of the studies we found were focused on work-related stress with recommendations to incorporate mindfulness into organization settings. But the truth was, when we pulled all of the literature that we could find that had the right keywords in it, that there was really a very shortage of empirical support and validation for the difference that the mindful leader or mindful leadership practices would have. And we were able to only in our literature review narrow it down to about 40 studies. Out of those 40 studies, we practiced what we teach in our own research classes. We put together tables that pulled the themes, the findings, the approaches that were used. We identified where the gaps were, and we were able to categorize the findings from the studies according to the evidence and what they were showing us. And what we found were this. There were several different areas that we were able to see that had to do with outcome. And the biggest bucket of literature themes by far were in self-mindfulness. So how does my mindfulness as a purported leader actually have an impact on me as a leader? Because the assumption is if I am more if I am at fuller capacity, that I will then lead better. So specifically what the research showed was a correlation between mindful practices and decreased anxiety, decreased stress, improvements over emotional exhaustion, better sleep, a higher rate of resilience and self-regulation, and a degree of optimism with increased job satisfaction and reduced burnout and compassion fatigue. Now, for some of you who've gone into the literature yourself to examine stress in the workplace or burnout or compassion fatigue, you know that there is a pretty solid growing body of literature around mindfulness practices in healthcare, in particular around the nursing population, that this area is growing largely week by week. And it is extending out to other healthcare professionals. That is what we also found in the leadership. And there aren't that many places to find leadership in healthcare literature or evidence-based studies. So there was really a limitation on if anybody here on this call is trying to figure out what you're going to do for your dissertation research, this is a gap that is calling to you. But what we also saw next is another layer, and that is how mindfulness of the other, how assuming that the other people you work with also has an impact and an outcome. And the outcomes that we saw looked at were improved work relationships, improved work-life balance, and increased compassion for the other. But we're that point less literature around that. Well, what's the mechanism for that? Well, we're calling this next piece relational mindfulness, which is that mindfulness is embraced intentionally as a practice between two or more people in an organization, in a group, for the purpose of seeing outcomes related to enhanced relationship, leading to increased tolerance for ambiguity, which is particularly important in some types of organizations and fields that have to do with innovation. For example, in technology, which, by the way, a footnote on that might explain why companies like Google and Intel have embraced mindfulness programs in their workplace. And also we saw studies about promoting collegiality and community within the workplace. Let's see, how am I doing on time? My 15-minute buzzer went off. Okay, picking up the pace here.
By the way, I'll just mention for everybody's sake, this is Don Moss. I am monitoring the chat box. So if anyone can't find their audio and wants to ask a question, I can relay the question to Dr. Fortune.
Thanks, Don. The fourth category we found was organizational mindfulness. And for us, what that meant was there a formal way within an organization, institution, a group of measuring outcomes attached to how organizationally systematic organization behavior conveyed to outcomes, looking at task performance or perseverance, financial sustainability, and whether there was another study that said that mindfulness mitigated job insecurity, feelings of job insecurity on the part of employees. So our big caveat around this was that the research showed that mindfulness process took time and demanded a lot of self-reflection, deliberate action, and a new mindset. We know that because something Kristen and I and now Dorianne keep reminding ourselves of is that in reading about this, it seems very simplistic. And across the internet, we were finding conference after podcast after webinar that were geared toward teaching people to become more mindful in their workplace and to increase their productivity and to become better leaders. And it had become almost prolific, so that at this point I signed up for a lot of alerts. I get a message about once a day from someplace or another that's offering a webinar or a podcast. But we know from doing it that this takes a lot of time and effort, time together, and work together. And nowhere yet have we found anything that addresses the challenges of implementing something that we think looks and sounds so simple when it's not. In the evidence, we also found different practices and processes that were associated with each of these categories. So in self-mindfulness, mostly the biggest category of studies we found had to do with MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. Thanks to the important groundbreaking work of John Kabat-Zinn, has become a standard that is prolific in many studies. That includes those that we were looking at in mindful leadership. What we saw there were MBSR programs that were introduced to leaders or to groups or to organizations with then outcomes measured before and after. Some of the research was qualitative, but MBSR was at the leader of the pack in the practices that we found in the literature, in the research. We also found dialectic behavior therapy as one of the interventions. So these were, we might think of them as researchers as interventions, but they were practices and processes that were put into place or could be put into place with the individuals or with the group. So also included acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based relapse prevention, and something that we're kind of excited about because we think it's growing and it has another dimension to it, is loving kindness meditation. And we think it's got another dimension because it's one of the practices that takes it out of the me and brings it into the us, brings it into a we situation. We also saw interventions around breathing and sitting meditations, mindful movement, a silent retreat was in there, and somatic awareness practices. Now, how does that convey over to the mindfulness of other? That we saw is an overlap between empathy and emotion recognition training, the literature on social intelligence development, and personality type preferences, such as MBTI and the Enneagram. And then there's our intersection again, loving kindness meditation. By the way, if any of you can sign up for our one-day workshop at the RC that we'll be doing in August, we're actually going to be doing some of these practices as part of the one day. We'll be introducing the principles and the theories behind them briefly, and then as a group we'll be practicing a variety of different of the practices according to self, other, and the next piece I will show you, which is the relational part. And what does that mean? How does this impact about me interacting with the other people around me? Mindful communication skills, deep listening, and being present with conversations, transparency in relationships, revealing information, thoughts, and emotions sincerely, getting feedback. So it has to do with communication styles and being present in communicating, and the space in between stimulus and response. And how does this equate? What are we talking about now with organizational mindfulness? Well, a certain openness to ideas and a certain democratic organizational structure emerged. For example, there is actually very little written about organization structures that are prevalent in healthcare organizations. But one of the interesting paradoxes I find is that in medical and clinical situations, for those of us who've worked in clinical situations, there is a hierarchical line of authority that transfers down. Yet the research around safety cultures in health care environments, which, as we all know, are incredibly important, have time and time again demonstrated that these safer cultures are those that are democratic and collaborative and operate on teamwork. So organizational mindfulness has to do with facilitating innovation, creativity, responsibility in a democratic, collaborative way. And Dorianne just found this quote from Daniel Goleman that came out very recently. Organization awareness means having the ability to read a group's emotional currents, systems, styles, and power relationships. So we come back to answers to the questions from our original literature review. What is leadership? Out of the work that we did, and this is not going back to all of the work on leadership, but stepping primarily into the leadership, mindfulness leadership literature, we came up with some definitions. So we found that leadership is relational and embodied through one or more individuals, and that leadership, rather than being a certain person, was a space which encouraged people to drop into the space depending upon what the needs of the situation, the problem were. So it encouraged a high degree of adaptability, collaboration, sustainability. And I think something that is inherent in that is trust to fulfill goals within a group or an organization. So what is the mindful, what leadership style within that? Well, it's the practice of using inner and outer awareness to help influence others, but doing it authentically and holding a perspective of the whole. At the same time, in the psychodynamic literature, they talk about working toward the outer boundaries of one's capacity, which is where the greatest amount of innovation occurs. That is the optimal workplace. The outer boundaries of effectiveness and success. That can be a very risky place to be. So if we are going fast in our franticness, in the pace that is being encouraged globally, we would tend to retract away from those outer boundaries, which is exactly where we need to be to solve the big problems of the world. What else is mindful leadership? It's an intention to balance movement and stillness, the space in between. And to create that space intentionally, not just to take advantage of it, actually to have structures in place to create the space to allow self and others to sit with ambiguity and to allow movement through it, which sounds like a very pretty picture, but then who does this? So who is the mindful leader? In theory, it's one who engages the accelerated pace and assumes leadership characterized by those intentional pauses to reflect, to connect, to experience, to act. It takes space and it takes time. The mindful leader has to live with paradox and ambiguity and can lead others successfully through those complex challenges because of it. Well, what's real about this? All right, Kristen and Dorianne and I at this point sit back and go, it sounds really good, and you read about it, and it sounds really inspirational, and the podcasts we've been listening to sound pretty good too, but this takes time and demands reflection and a great degree of trust and security to be deliberate. And it doesn't always happen. In fact, maybe we're lucky if it happens sometimes because it requires a good deal of discipline. So at this point, I've got more I want to show you, but before I take you to the next step, which is our synthesis of the whole thing, I'm very interested to hear if there are any questions out there, what your thoughts are about mindful leadership and who you think the mindful leader is, and what you've heard so far tonight that might give you some questions or challenges. So this is a time where you can say, Luann, I don't think that's right at all. Go ahead.
I'm gonna,
Deanne,
can Catherine speak for herself? Otherwise, I'll read her remark in the chat box. Catherine, do you have audio?
I do.
Okay, why don't
I
you go
do.
ahead?
Well, wow, bravo for pulling all of this together. First of all, wow, that's a mouthful you've just said there, Luann. So the first thing that came to my mind was wondering whether or not you have written all of this up, or you're going to be publishing it or sharing it, in particular with folks like me who'd be inspired by it. I've been kind of astounded, sitting here kind of astounded by the synchronicity. Interestingly enough, you opened talking about these synchronicities because I've fallen into a position, not really looking for it, but that I've been trying to do something kind of like this here in Silicon Valley, and picking up on just how hungry people are for it. Feeling like I wish I was more prepared to bring it. So I think that it's really exciting that Saybrook is, kind of poised to offer it. And it's kind of reminds me of Wisdom 2.0. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's something that happens here in Silicon Valley annually now, where they bring together a lot of mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn has been there every year, actually. Ariana Huffington and Byron Katie, I think her name is, all kinds of people like that who are sort of mindfulness thought leaders. I guess the question that I would have is one that I'm going to have to sit with, which is, yeah, I think I'm going to have to sit with it because I've been coming all this way so far, the first year of my PhD program, so focused on cancer treatment and trauma, and the universe here in Silicon Valley has been pointing me towards everything that you've just been talking with. And I've heard that people change their minds about things in the middle of their PhD programs, and I'm just going to sit with it. Either way I end up going, it's really exciting to know that Saybrook is poised to kind of guide people in this direction.
Catherine.
That's all I have to say.
Okay, and I'd like to address, I think I can pull two questions out of there that I can address very clearly. One is that Kristen and I presented this and the rest of what I'm going to share tonight at an academic conference in May. So we actually, in the literature review, used a phenomenology model to analyze the literature. So we presented at a phenomenology conference. It was the Interdisciplinary Coalition of North American Phenomenologists, and Kristen came with me to Ramapo, New Jersey. So together we presented this to a panel there, and we have a wonderful presentation from it, and this presentation you're seeing tonight is based on that. We also now have an outline for the article that we're going to write, because we agree we want to publish this as a literature review on mindful leadership. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody. I hope it's not from me. So thank you. So the second thing that we're going to do with it is we're making a curriculum out of it. So what this work that we're showing you tonight has done already is it's created the one-day RC syllabus and agenda that Dorianne and I, with Christian's help, are going to be teaching in August. So if you are available to take this, we're hoping to see you in Monterey. It's the Monday of the RC week, and we're really excited about bringing us this one-day workshop. It's not attached to a class yet, but we think it's the introduction, and we hope that it generates even more interest in what we're going to do next. Because the next thing we're going to do with the material is we're going to split it off into two classes. The first class will be offered in the spring of 2018, and it will focus on the organizational, institutional level, the meta level, and the other one will be launched in the fall of 2018, and it will focus on the individual leadership style level. And we want to continue to feed this with evidence as it comes out. So I'm hoping that many of you will help contribute to that very evidence and will be able to draw from our own student studies. I already can. For example, the dissertation work of Ruth Ann Rousseau and Francine Lawrence have contributed to my thinking on this. So I thank you all for helping bring me to this point. The final thing on this is I do think that there is a vast movement going on. What we do and can do here in our program that is unique is we are an evidence-based program, and we did not just come to mindfulness last week. We've been doing mindfulness for a long time in a lot of different ways, and we're truly dedicated to it as a way of being in healthcare, wellness, and prevention. The other thing that we do well is that we all share a practice-based appreciation of how difficult this is. And I know that you can all relate to this idea that it sounds simple, and it's not easy. So I want to go on with where we went to next, but are there other questions from the group, Don, or Dorianne and Kristen, do you want to add anything?
This is Dorianne. I'll just add that, Catherine, can you hear me? Luann, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, go
I
ahead.
can't.
Okay.
I'm staying on mute so that that isn't so bad.
Yeah, because I was hearing an echo. What Catherine had to say about what's going on in Silicon Valley and Wisdom 2.0, and there are several other conferences similar to that around the US and in Europe, is like a microcosm of the macrocosm of what you were just talking about, Luann, with the context and the fact that the way our world is accelerating in complexity and in all of the impacts of what's happening in the world is requiring that everyone become more adaptable, more resilient, and so these are the types of topics that are being discussed at Wisdom 2.0, and so I think it's a great observation, Catherine, that you're seeing that synchronicity.
Okay, I'm going to move on. And I'm going to rely on everybody else to move me along if I gas on too far and I lose track of time. But this next part's sort of important for us because as we continue, so we're dwelling in the literature. What I've told you right now is based on our reading of hundreds, if in Kristen's case, probably thousands of pages of articles, the bulk of which have been what we might think of as reviews or thought pieces, but some are actually original empirical literature. So at this point, I thought it was important for us to pause and step back and say, okay, let's take a look at healthcare leadership because there is not a lot here that's specific and what is different about healthcare leadership than in other places. And I'm not sure that this is different than other places, but healthcare does have some things that characterizes it. Some of it is well documented, and other parts, I will admit, is anecdotal. So, for example, the very first line here, leaders come from the ranks. I'm going to rely on one of my most recent graduating students, Peg Belo's dissertation, to cite that because it came out of her dissertation. Leaders come from the ranks. Ordinarily, that is not necessarily well documented. I can't point to tons and tons of articles that say, oh yes, the people who are in leadership positions in nursing and in hospitals and clinics are people who started as nurses and doctors. In fact, some of the corporate or the large business trends might indicate the otherwise, that leaders are coming in from corporate places that are not practice-based, but in more conventional middle line situations, and I know this is true in nursing, that the people who are leading the teams are coming from the ranks of people who are practicing. So in many cases, they are not equipped with specialized leadership skills. They are coming into this with a practice basis. One thing that a couple things come out of the research about qualities. One is that there's a high level of burnout and compassion fatigue in healthcare workers. There are tons of studies about this, and they vary somewhat according to the kind of healthcare that one is practicing. But the studies indicate that burnout is prolific. It is everywhere around us in healthcare. This is a major challenge, not only for individual loss of talent and quality of life, but also to the organization in terms of loss of manpower, innovation, experience, and even quality care while people are on the job, because there's diminished productivity and competency. Furthermore, healthcare professionals are notorious, in the literature anyway, from being challenged to practice self-care on an individual level, but benefit from mindfulness training. So it's a situation where the awareness might be there, but the readiness to practice is not quite there. So one of the gaps in the literature is, okay, what does it take to get people from awareness about the importance of mindfulness to the place where we're actually doing it because we know it's good for us? Where have we become failed mindfulness practitioners in the process? Or maybe awareness is where we need to be right now in terms of our developmental cycle. There's also high chronic stress levels that contribute to a level of incivility and bullying. And I've had a couple students who've touched on that in their dissertation and their research work, and how it contributes to unhealthy work conditions and unsafe work conditions in the workplace, creating subsequent stress within individuals, but also a culture of unsafety on an organizational basis. And this is a big concern economically to people who pay for healthcare, as well as for those who receive and practice it. So some other characteristics. And by the way, I put together these things thanks to Dorianne, who challenged me to say, okay, well, you've been saying healthcare is so different. Tell me about why it's so different. So a couple things that we found in terms of looking at the hierarchy. There's a tendency toward a paternalistic versus an autonomous type of organization culture. But we know that organizational cultures that support autonomous choices enhance workers' health promoting behaviors. So in healthcare, maybe we've got additional challenges to overcome to get to a more democratic interaction in our practice settings, to get to a place, because healthcare organization structures tend to be hierarchical. And in the old way, in one way of looking at organizational cultures and structures, and one of my favorite references on this is the work of Gareth Morgan, as some of you know, who I'm particularly enamored with, right? The book, I'm blanking out. You know which one I mean. About militaristic chains of command to support critical care decision making, with the idea that strict hierarchies according to elite decision making, where he who has the most technical knowledge was the one who was in charge, and leads to that type of chain of command and who makes the decision. So the doctor's making the decision, even if the nurse at the other end of the table realizes that there is something terribly, terribly wrong here. And we can tell time and time stories about what we've heard about this and what we've read about it. And the research supports this. There are now studies to demonstrate and to support this. So at the same time, more collaborative organization cultures promote error prevention and safety and all of those other important humanistic things like better work relationships, better contributions, a better wellness program and system. But right now, clinical decision making is still linear, it's sequential, and the authority for final decision making in clinical situations often depends on the level of training and credentials that are present. Images of organization. Gareth Morgan is the one who talks about militaristic chains of command in some organizational cultures according to the field, and healthcare would tend to be in that direction with top-down lines of authority, which are particularly sensitive to the challenges of rising costs, which those of us who've worked clinically are all familiar with. So in healthcare, leadership concepts that are important here. This is important because of the next thing we're going to go into, which is going to synthesize it all, hopefully. We've got some basic concepts that we want to define. First of all, what are we talking about with self-care? Because these concepts are paramount to the next place we're going to take you. First of all, self-care, to create a shift from the way healthcare is right now to a more mindful, transformative environment will require some fundamental constructs. One is an attention to self-care. What do we mean by that? Deliberate self-initiated behaviors to improve one's mental, emotional, physical, social, and all spiritual development and overall health. Somatic awareness, which is partnered with self-care, but I'm going to differentiate them here because somatic awareness also appreciates that I, in my body, have my own body, and you have your own body. And everyone here on this call, even if you're not in my room with me, has your own body that only you can be responsible for. So it's the practice of recognizing and experiencing one's body and noticing sensations in a non-judgmental way. But it also presupposes that by recognizing my own awareness, I accept that you have your own version of that is going on simultaneously but separately from me. Basic building block. Next concept, really important, autonomy. And we find this in the self-determination theory literature. This is critical because it's the freedom of self-determination, coupled with claiming full responsibility for one's experience, so that creating that space I've been talking about for others can happen, to allow others to take full responsibility for their experience, embodied in their own body, with their own somatic awareness, taking their own self-care of themselves. And all of this sounds like it could easily get pretty self-righteous. So the best way to approach it is with a base level of authenticity. And that's back to us saying this is not easy. So the most authentic statement I can make is none of this is easy. And I'm not sure we all do it right now. But what I mean by authenticity is a quality of genuineness. And it's based on honesty, truthful self-awareness, relational transparency, balanced communication, trust, connection. And what that means in an organization is the security to be able to be authentic without fear of repercussions. Kristen and I went to bed talking about this the day before, and we woke up the next morning and drew a picture, and both of us had something that looked like this and said, there are really 4 dimensions to what we're talking about, or 4 spaces to it. So the first is based on the idea that I myself, my own somatic awareness, I have to care for myself and my own mindfulness within this. At the same time, at the apex of the bottom of this box, there is you, the other, and you also have your own somatic awareness, your own body, your own space that you occupy in this universe, and you only can take care of you and your self-care and your mindfulness. That has to come from you internally. So how do I maximize the possibility for this? Well, one is in my relationships with you, building on authenticity. I have transpersonal connection that honors that individual separateness and that authority. How do I provide support on the other side in my leadership? Well, I make space for autonomy. I create structures that allow people to take risks, to make individual decisions, to work collaboratively. And we realized this wasn't flat at all. It was actually a quadratic pyramid. So in the way we synthesize this, we had this visual that came up for us that is inspiring to us, because at the base, we saw a grounding. in the reality of what's going on in the universe. Everything we've talked about here in the context of the challenges we're facing as a planet, as a solar system, a universe, as a community. But there's an apex where we connect the parts. They're not operating independently when this works properly. This being the phenomena of mindful leadership. Things actually come together, and they are meant to be working toward coming together. And as Kristen pointed out, if you chopped off the very top of the pyramid, you'd have a platform, and that's called a fundus, I believe. And we could all be dancing on top of the fundus there, because the highest potential is where the boundaries occur and they provide for us to interact. So again, what does this mean to us? Well, on one side of the pyramid, we have, I'll start with the upper right-hand side. So one plane is self-mindfulness. So let's just say that in an ideal universe, in the perfect universe, that self-mindfulness with a body awareness at the base and entrained consciousness all the way to the apex starts with me as the individual, as the leader, as the co-worker, as the person, as the citizen, as the family member, as the person in this group. And on the opposite side, in the lower left-hand corner of my slide, there is also a plane that moves up, and that is you. You are the other, because you are an individual and you have your own mindfulness. And you are also grounded in your own somatic awareness. You are responsible for your own self-care. Only you can know whether or not you're being truly mindful, or if you might be multitasking through my entire presentation. That is not my choice, and I can't control that. You are the only one who can hold your own mindfulness. But we can bend it together in such a way, and it's joined if we allow for relational mindfulness. And we just this last week saw an article that talked about, it was a book chapter, talked about collective mindfulness, about being able to create and work off group energy, about the transpersonal ability of mindfulness to hold a space for connecting and for sharing. And the base of that would have to be authenticity, genuine interaction, and a degree of trust. But on the opposite side of that, in my upper left-hand corner here, is organization mindfulness. And that's an intention and a commitment from the structure, from the institution, from the group, from the organization, however it defines itself, to support, to generate, and to support systems and processes and methods and mechanisms that will allow these things to occur, that will then hopefully inform optimal growth, contributions, generativity, well-being, starting with autonomy, but grounded in practical structures. Now, what do we even mean by that? Well, a workplace wellness program is a structure. Flex time is a structure. Giving people time to meditate at lunchtime is a structure, or walk at their lunch breaks, or any number of different programs that we're seeing come up that some companies are installing and some workers are taking advantage of in increasing numbers, because we think that as these things happen, they will come together at the apex. So I'm going to go back to that for a second, because I see I'm finally running out of steam here. So the idea is that in an ideal universe, that these 4 categories of themes that we found from the literature actually represent different planes that have their own dynamic, that can come together, that represent in an evidence-based way this movement that we're seeing that's called mindful leadership. Pause and reflect. I'm going to sit back and stop for a second. I'm going to invite my panelist colleagues to comment. First of all, how did that come? Was that clear, guys? Was I authentic to our work here in presenting it? And can you add and share?
Yes. Can you, let's see, I'm trying to come back on here. Can you see me? No.
I can't see anybody except the doctor
Okay, wait.
sitting on the beach.
There we go. All right. I would like to say a couple of things. First of all, I think this model that Luann, you and Kristen have developed is really brilliant. And the thing that I really love about the model is it's holistic. It's considering all the parameters, I think, in any kind of system that is dealing with organizations. And if you're thinking of healthcare systems, and then within healthcare systems, the organizations that reside within that, and then there's the larger context of the world. You've covered everything from self to other to relational to organization structure. So I really appreciate that. And I think what struck me as you were talking, Luann, and I'm wondering if others got this as you were listening, how much courage it takes to be mindful. Courage and vulnerability, because you use the word trust many times in your description of some of the things that are required in order to create particularly relational mindfulness, and is what we would call, actually what I call collective virtuosity. It's this something that happens from a transpersonal perspective that is an energy that's creative, collaborative, and raises the consciousness of the whole organization. And it touches everyone, not just the people who are working within an organization, but the people they serve. So if it's within a hospital, for example, or within some kind of wellness environment, it's going to affect the relational mindfulness will affect the patients or clients of that environment. So anyway, that I'm just giving a little bit of my immediate feedback, and I'm wondering if others are sensing some of those same things.
Thank you.
I don't see comments if people are writing in the chat box.
Thank you about the point about courage and vulnerability. I think that that's so important, and those are definitely words I need to add more to my vocabulary, because I agree with that. Yeah.
I'd like to make some comments as well, because I found this quite fascinating and inspirational, and it takes me in a number of directions. I think it's quite significant that you finally ended up with a pyramid. Last November, I stood deep inside the Great Pyramid at Giza with one of our faculty, Eric Wilmarth, and one of our doctoral students, Rand Harper, and we began to chant together just spontaneously, and the resonance within that structure was so fascinating, so absorbing. What strikes me is how many different dimensions come together here. You begin by, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have somatic awareness and then self-care. And one of our graduate students, already an alum, already graduated, was Molly Lon, and both in her pilot study and then in her dissertation, she explored when she did taught people breath work, various kinds. Some of it was explicitly heart math breath work, heartfelt breathing, and some of it was simple paced breathing. She measured spontaneous changes both in compassion for others and in self-compassion, and in a sense of compassion satisfaction, which is a construct which involves a kind of compassionate attunement to others and even to the world. So just doing something physical or seemingly physical, something with breath, there was a transformation in the relationship with oneself and also with others and with the world. And it strikes me that breath is one of the key tools for mindfulness training. It's also one of the oldest spiritual practices. And you also made a comment that this is This is not just individual. It's not just the self, although the self is there. It's one face of that pyramid that you created. But it's also relational, and it relates to the other and even to systems and organizations. A lot of the breath work in the past 4,000 years has taken place in monastic settings where people come together and breathe and chant together and are transformed. And oftentimes there have been transformative effects that rippled out from those monastic centers to transform cultures. And so I hope that part of what's happening here, not just at Saybrook, but at in Silicon Valley, with John Kabat-Zinn, with Wisdom 2.0. I hope that something's happening which is going to be transformative, bringing a new mindfulness, a new loving kindness, a new transpersonal connectedness and awareness, which will transform our organization. Some of our corporate systems are deadly, terribly destructive, and this perspective you shared this evening tells us that they don't have to be, that we can transform our systems and our organizations. So those are my thoughts and reactions to your very provocative presentation.
Thank you, Don.
We have a comment from Catherine Lawson again. Catherine, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to mention this, your comment and question?
We were not hearing you, Catherine. You must have muted yourself. There we go.
Oh yeah, I was just having a grand old chat with myself. I just wanted to say that, from my perspective here, the courage that I'm witnessing is coming from the two of you embarking on such a huge examination of something so important. The question that I have is, in the research, did you see embodiment come up very much, or a sense of embodiment as viewed as a part of mindfulness? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
I think it does. I think, Catherine, you and I might have even talked about this on different occasions. I think I'm getting an echo again. You're going to have to mute, I think, for a second. This is Luann's personal opinion, but I think MBSR is not as embodied, meaning as somatically based, as some other systems. And this is, I think, a debate that goes on within the mindfulness community, is the cognitive piece versus the somatic part. I also, by way of disclosure, I'm a body worker. I'm still a licensed massage therapist, and when I most need healing myself, I go and I find somebody to go work on. So I come to my knowledge, my best wisdom, through my somatic experience, and I, as a result of that, think that everybody needs to have a little taste of that. But my anecdotal response to that is that, one, I don't think there is as much focus on it as there could be because of our tendency to be cognitive. And number two is the danger of this in any endeavor is to lose the base of somatic awareness. And somatic awareness might just be my word around it, but if we don't stay embodied, and if we don't stay embodied in our own practices, then this is going to be a paper moon. And there will be no grounding, there'll be no roots to it. And if you think about chakra work, you've got to start with the base. You have to start with the reds and the oranges before you can get to the violets and the whites. So the importance for me is that you have practice, and that practice be based in body. And last anecdotal story. A couple weeks ago, I was contacted by somebody. I won't give away who they were, but they contacted me from around the globe. They're actually from the UK, because they were putting together a mindfulness summit. of fairly important academics they were drawing in together, and they had done it before. And I spent a long time explaining to them my perspective on the literature. And I asked them what they were doing in terms of practice, and they admitted that it never went well for them to take moments of mindfulness like we started with tonight, because the academics had no patience for it. And I will leave you to draw your own conclusions on that. Other questions? Yeah, comment.
I just want to add that there were a couple of articles about embodied mindfulness in the literature that we saw,
Right.
and I am in agreement with Luann about well, even just going to what Dawn said about breathing. The breath is in the body, and therefore being mindful of our breath is being mindful in an embodied way. And so I don't think you can divorce the two.
Thank you, Dorian.
Hi, everyone.
We
This is
also-
Carolyn. Oh, sorry, Kristen. Go ahead.
Oh, go right ahead, Carolyn.
Are you sure? Because I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments, really. And one is to just express my gratitude as well for all the work that you guys have done to put this together. And not only the courage, but for me, it has always been the synchronicities. And Luann and I have had those conversations. We don't always get a chance to speak directly, but every time we do, there's always the most powerful synchronistic thing that occurs. And this whole presentation, part of what brought me to Saybrook is what I feel has been my soul's passion to transform healthcare as a practitioner. In fact, before I ever knew about Saybrook, I had been creating self-care trainings in the medical field with doctors, nurses, speech therapists, etc., even within emergency departments, to try to help teach them the importance of some of these very things. And as I'm hoping to finish my doctorate within the next 6 months, I'm actually trying to find hospitals that are open to somebody wanting to be a leader to help lead this cultural change. And that takes a lot of perseverance and courage. And so the stuff that you guys have put together with all of the energy and work that you've done, to me, it also provides some of that actual data that the healthcare field is totally based on. And for me, being immersed in healthcare, I know I've always tried to come up with language that can better serve as a bridge, because when you sit with a medical doctor, they're not necessarily open to language of mindfulness, depending on how we present it. And so figuring out some of these ways to keep pushing for that common language is a struggle. And I don't know those answers either, but that's like what I'm living in my life each day. So this whole presentation has just, it's affirmed for me, and I don't even need more affirmation, but it's totally affirmed for me Saybrook was exactly the right place for me to be, because they're my tribe, you guys totally get me. And now for me, just trying to figure out how do I keep adding my energy to this collective, because that's really, really important to keep trying to best align with my soul's purpose, as a practitioner. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm appreciating the point that you're making about the language that we use, and the importance of finding words that are able to be received, and also what's been brought up about the tendency to be so cognitive rather than somatic, and how do we create a marriage between the two. And I've been aware, as I'm reading through the articles, how so many of the words have become buzzwords that we're even more in a cognitive space about, like burnout. That's a very common word, or resiliency. And so if we really take a look at what those actually mean, they are experiences in our body. We had one paper that defined burnout as emotional exhaustion and cynicism, which really stuck out to me, because if we're carrying cynicism in our body, how destructive are we being? And and what kind of culture is that creating in our healthcare system when we're really supposed to be about healing not only the patients, but ourselves as well. And so I asked myself kind of a similar question of how do I work with these words and draw people down into the experience where the transformation can actually happen.
Let's see, do we have other questions? And do we have more slides? I think, oh, we did. We had a couple more slides
We
about,
do.
yeah, we do. Yeah, just,
We have 2 more slides. We're
and
almost out of time too.
I'll just throw one quick just piece of information about how this all interconnects. You were just mentioning, Kristen, the cynicism, and I read just this morning a study that thoughts of cynical hostility result in shortened telomeres and more accelerated aging. So the body, the awareness, the quality of our thoughts, our relationships with others, it all interconnects.
Thank you all. I guess I should finish up with our last few slides because they were really about the implications. So we felt like we needed to sort of put a bow on top of this and what the indications for action were. And this is, I guess, what we're all saying, that what we can each do is we can practice what we preach. So the very practice of mindfulness. But we can also listen to each other. And that probably takes as much courage as anything to cultivate techniques for deep listening, self toward the other. But how do we translate that then? How do we create we space, that space to allow, when we're running from one meeting to another, when we're running from one email to the next and one patient to the next one, how do we create that space and do it in such a way so that there's a team process? And in doing so, create in the organizational structure systems and methods to support where we want the outcomes to go, like wellness plans and rewarding self-care and making that space for innovation. So possibilities. We probably need more empirical studies of mindfulness practices and their impact on healthcare systems leader, and studies on leadership development programs as related to self, other relational and organizational wellness, the way we've defined them. And I see I cut off the bottom of my slide here. And then how do the policies and practices in healthcare systems for funding mindfulness initiatives, where does the sustainability come from on that level? Because I think we all appreciate that what we're talking about is critical for sustaining our humanistic view on people on Earth and healthcare. But how in the short term do organizations pay for it? And that actually did show up in one of the studies. So making this financially feasible is something we have to be able to help do too. And Dorianne came up with this. Dorianne, do you want to close with reading this?
It's not showing on the screen here. Is anybody else seeing it? I think you have to share your screen.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry. I've been lost. My slides went off. Got it?
Okay. Yes. So this is it's a plein air painting that my sister, she's a wildlife artist, and these are heron chicks in a nest. And this is a quote from Pema Chodron: "To be fully alive, fully human, and completely awake is to be continually thrown out of the nest. To live fully is to be always in no man's land, to experience each moment as completely new and fresh. To live is to be willing to die over and over again." And I think that really relates all the way, it's a circle right back to the beginning of the context of our crazy world that we live in, and being mindful or using mindfulness practices and approaches can help us be able to thrive in an environment where we are thrown out of the nest, where we are finding ourselves experiencing chaos. And the idea of dying over and over again, in my mind, is it's about moving beyond the boundaries of ego and seeing a much larger sense of self that's interconnected. So that's, I guess, how I would close this. But Luann, if you might have something else you want to add to that.
I would like to thank you. And I think I'll also say that we have references, so we can probably send anyone who is interested copies of this presentation. And Don, is there anything you would like to say to close? I want to thank everybody for being part of this, and my colleagues as well, for all the work that's really gone into this and to where it's hopefully going to take us next. Don?
Well, I want to thank our panelists, Luann Drolk Fortune, Kristen Jameson, and Dorianne Cotter-Lockhart for stimulating presentation, thoughtful perspectives that each of us can carry with us. And I hope that each of us will carry these, that just like the birds in the nest that are almost ready to hatch or not hatch, but to launch and fly. I hope that each of us will find some way to carry these perspectives forward, whether it's the simple act of pausing and breathing mindfully, or whether we carry this into organizations in transformative ways. I also want to wish the faculty well with this new PhD specialization. The degree is the PhD in mind-body medicine, but the specialization is mindful leadership, because we know that it's not enough just to transform our students as professionals and practitioners. We also have to transform the systems, especially the systems that deliver healthcare, but also the rest of the systems that make up our world, in the modern world. So thank you for this program this evening.
Thank you, Don.
Thank
you. Okay, good night, everybody. If you've got any questions, you know where to find me. Please email, spread the word. We'll convert the recording to a YouTube. I'll put it out on the Mentoring and the Faculty Center. And remember, there is a one-day workshop at the RC. If you can take it, please do join us.